all here, all the order. Let's begin, please, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
And if we could just take a moment of silence. Hey, today we are having the work session, the February 10th work session of the Ogden Valley Planning Commission. And I am going to let Councilman Booth introduce our speaker for this evening.
Great. And I'm gonna make it very short and sweet. I've worked with Craig a little bit on the Ogden Valley Land Trust board for about a year now. Yeah, and he's been a wealth of knowledge helping us out on the Land Trust board, and now being a part of the new Ogden Valley city government, I've recognized that there is a need there for us to gain more knowledge on the land use ordinances, and Craig is kind of the perfect person for that. He's written a book, Ground Rules, which is specifically on that, and so highly recommend it. I've got it marked up in mine and through my second reading of it right now too, and so we're happy to have him here. He has a second home up here in the valley, over in the Nordic Valley, Spring Mountain area, and also resides full-time in Plain City. So welcome, Craig, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Always glad to receive that at the beginning, because you never know. Yeah. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed some association with the Valley. I've always admired it, and my childhood days were spent admiring one of your particular residents, a fellow named McKay. And I've always thought of Huntsville and the stories I've heard about the Valley. But when we moved to Weber County 30 years ago, then it was fun to even get closer. My grandmother's grandfather was prominent in Weber County, and Lewis Peak is named after him.
Oh.
And it's just a natural thing. We really enjoyed the opportunity to get closer. We put a feeler out to see if we could find a place up here, and the realtor looked for a couple of years, and finally we decided we had to give her a little bit higher number than what we were asking for, and she got it, and she called us on Friday, and we bought it on Saturday. So
Of this week?
pardon?
Just this week, or is this in the
Oh,
past?
no, 6 years ago. We
Okay.
bought it the day after we saw the listing. The day after the listing was actually published. So we're just so delighted to be here. It's a lot of fun. And then we heard that the Ogden Valley Land Trust was looking for help, and that also was a great fit. Glad to be part of it. Anyway, I need to explain my checkered past a little bit. I was a member of a city council. You know, sometimes we have things we have to live down. I also served in the state legislature, and I've never had the honor of being on a planning commission. So at least where it was someone else's choice, I didn't quite make the cut. But I'm an attorney, and I was the first property rights ombudsman for the state. So for 10 years, I helped resolve disputes involving land use. So that led to an entity called the Utah Land Use Institute, which I now am the executive director of, and that helps fill the lonely hours. Anyway, let me just share our screen if I can, and we'll. Interesting. I was on the wrong screen. I have to go back to the Zoom screen. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I just want to talk philosophically for a minute, and then really I'm much more interested in a conversation than I am some kind of a lecture. So I need to mention and thank the Ombudsman's office. They now have been involved in funding activities involving the publication of land use materials and having these kind of discussions. And so I have to give them credit, and they'll pay for my miles back and forth. So and a small stipend. Anyway, land use is a big deal, and it gets to be, you know, sometimes there are emergencies. This is an example of what happened in Draper. It's not that unusual. It happened in Mountain Green as well, where a house once stood in that place, and it wasn't a mobile home, but it moved, and everything moved but the mortgage. The mortgage is still right back where it was.
That's awful.
And so we have to be adaptive and try to figure out how to change the environment. In this case, I'm an avid reader of the Valley News and follow the Facebook pages and somewhat aware of what a ambitious program you're involved in here with the creation of a new city and the rethinking of the way things are done and should be done. So I thought philosophically again, just to talk for a second. When local government entities were created, they were the third thought in a way. The basic unit of government in the United States is the state. I'm not sure everybody in Washington understands that, but that's kind of how it started. There were 13 colonies, and those colonies then created the federal government. Local governments are all creatures of the state. And you found that through the arduous process of trying to figure out how to get an independent government engine going, and that is you had to open the state law and go through a lot of state rules. So the state basically is the beginning point for the laws we have, and local governments enact their regulations and pass their zoning ordinances within the discretion that's allowed by the state. And the state basically is three branches of government. You understand, of course, that there's the administrative side that I call the agencies that so ably protect our outdoor space and our roads and all those important vital parts of our lives. There's the judicial branch, which writes much of the law and much of what we quote in the handbook. And of course, the legislative branch. And right now we tremble because they're in session. And who knows? But because of what you saw with the landslide, the coming of growth, the high passions involved, particularly with the cost of housing, there's just a lot of moving parts. And so we all just have to kind of stand against the wind and figure out how we're supposed to cope with the different competing attitudes. So this is just a bit of ground rules. So basically, involved in local land use decisions are the risks so sometimes renters, sometimes landowners, but those are the voters. But there are also non-resident landowners who are involved and have a stake in the outcome. And so sometimes they get involved. In too many cases, their entry into the scene is through a disappointed result that ends up in litigation. But you also have future residents who don't live here yet. And 50 years from now, most of us won't be around, but somebody will. And that somebody will be enjoying all of the great amenities and the results of the good decisions that you made. And then we have visitors and workers that come and go, that they don't have a permanent anchor, but still come in droves, as you know, and really enjoy the amenities that you offer here. So the interesting thing about zoning is that zoning, however, is more or less controlled by the voters. And there's a subset of the voters who in this illustration usually are homeowners or landowners who speak at hearings and show up and make the comments and decisions. The problem we have is, and this is a concept that everybody has to understand to be successful in any aspect. The judges and the legislature look at all those people and their interests. Hopefully, the people locally who make decisions have to weigh and balance all of those. And when the system gets out of whack, sometimes it's because we listen too much to what's going on in the room by people with the loudest voices, and not necessarily the bigger picture of who actually is affected. And the good news is I can't be critical because you haven't done anything. It's nice to talk about it in the abstract because I'm not talking to anyone who yet has a lot of bad decisions to live with. But this helps understand a little bit why the legislature often gets involved and jumps in and why the courts draw lines. So as local government entities, there are different tiers of rules that you have to consider and take into account. First of all, the Constitution, of course, although there isn't much in your local land use decisions that brings the Constitution into play. That doesn't mean nobody ever mentions it, but you knew that already. Second, you've got state law, the statutes. You've got the judicial decisions and how they control us. Right now, for example, one recent litigation involved the Wasatch Peaks area in Morgan County. And that, there was a referendum, there was an effort to try to litigate, and it worked out that they settled and came to a conclusion. But we live in that environment. And one of the things we can talk about tonight, if you want to, is how to make decisions bulletproof. How do we make a decision that sticks that a person can't successfully challenge? That doesn't mean they won't be challenged. The question is, will they be successfully challenged? And then, ironically, and sometimes it's difficult to remember this, we have to follow our own rules. So the city is bound by the rules that are set. And if somebody comes in and presents an application and it's consistent with the rules, they have to be approved. The city has no more discretion to deny once the city has set the rules and somebody complies with them. And this goes back to an old common law principle that's been cited by the court in a number of cases, that when Adam and Eve came out of the garden, or when the first creatures came from where they came from, whichever your perspective is, they didn't need zoning. They didn't have it. And Peter Skeen Ogden didn't have it either. And when the old families of the valley came and settled, they were pretty well just did what they were used to doing because there wasn't a lot of rule. As time went by, of course, we created the structure, and the courts have basically said the original default status of human beings is they are free, that they have liberty. And so if there's no law against it, people can do what they want to do. So the default thing is people can do what they want to do. So you have to find a specific prohibition before a person has to do something that they wish they didn't have to, or something they wish to do. It has to be in writing. It has to be in a way that it can be enforced. And now, of course, I met with Weber County this morning, and they talked about their effort to take the 580-page Weber County Land Use Code and cut 100 pages out. And I said, "Ooh, can I pick the 100 pages?" They didn't jump right at that as an opportunity. But anyway, that's basically the lay of the land. We have all these competing interests. The different points of view come here. No law is enacted for Ogden Valley City, or whatever name we choose it to be, unless the Planning Commission recommends and the City Council approves. I mean, there is no other way. So only the Planning Commission and the City Council then have the opportunity to balance all these factors and come up with a wise and defensible, completely fair and absolutely beyond criticism decision that affects everybody in the area. Any comments or questions at that point? Okay, well, let me just mention this to start out the more conversational thing. So at the top of the top 10 list that I gave you is this issue of administrative and legislative decisions. So the planning commission is always involved in both. The city council doesn't have to be involved in anything administrative, but it's really rare in a small community that the city council doesn't get involved. But a legislative act, for example, is creating the ordinance, writing the general plan, annexing land, those kinds of things, deciding which uses are allowed in each of the zones, drawing the zoning map. Those are legislative issues, and they always are. And the city council can't do those things without the advice of the planning commission. So if it's legislative, it goes to the planning commission, and then it goes to the council. Because the council has a lot of things going, and the planning commission's view is more narrow, and you can focus and help, consider all those balancing interests in ways that the city council might not have the time and bandwidth to do. Administrative acts are different. Once the law is written, then it's an administrative function to enforce it and to apply it. So when a person comes in and wants to do a subdivision or establish a conditional use, if you set those up, or get some other business license or run a short-term rental or whatever the city decides to allow, then somebody has to process that application. And the bottom line is, if the application complies with the ordinances you set, then it must be approved. And that's kind of the administrative function. And the discretion is less according, to this rough diagram, because the rules are already written and we're only applying the rules, we're not inventing them. Although sometimes we get into interpretation. And that's a good thing for lawyers, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is a wonderful thing for me and therefore for you, because we just really appreciate it when lawyers are able to make money and do their job, keep their kids alive, send them to college, those kinds of things. But it ought to be a little more cleaner sometimes than a couple of lawyers in the room might pretend that it is. So look at the list. Tell me where you'd like to go from here. What would you like to talk about, and how can I be of help? By the way, there were more copies of that list if anyone doesn't have them.
There are more.
Does it have to be on the list?
No, it doesn't.
I'm curious. I haven't gotten all the way through the book, but first of all, thank you for writing it. It's been incredibly helpful so far. I believe your stance is to minimize conditional use permits as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if there's a quick synopsis or way for you to convey when conditional use permits make sense versus trying to write an ordinance that doesn't necessitate it.
What a great question. And one that's really vital. Interestingly enough, when I teach case law, and sometimes a large group and I don't know what they want to hear, I'll just show pictures of the recent cases, like there are in the book, photos of the actual places where the events handled. It's amazing how many of those are conditional use cases.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason is that as much as you try to make the law predictable, conditional uses are by nature something a little fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
And the legislature, under the good influence of both the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the Association of Counties, the Realtors, and the Home Builders, have tried to tighten it up, but there's a resistance in the local sector to really have things be deemed objective instead of subjective. So the best way, I believe the best practices is, number one, if you like the use, permit the use. And if you want it to be only done in certain ways, you can put in restrictions in the code for every use. And say, okay, you can have a short-term rental, but every short-term rental must comply with these rules. And that's nothing new. You know, I mean, somebody comes in and wants to start manufacturing houses. There's all kinds of rules, building codes and other things that apply to that particular project. So rather than try to invent the rules every time they have an application, there's an advantage to having it in the ordinance because it's cleaner and crisper. But behind this is what we're talking about in number 2 here, when to hold a public hearing. One of the things that I hear people complain about the most is, why are you holding a hearing when your mind's already made up? I was visiting with the folks in Smithfield and they said that, and I said, you don't have to hold a hearing. Hearings are required for legislative issues. But if you choose to do conditional uses and you choose to have a hearing on a conditional use, then you are putting yourself in a position where it's really difficult to make an impassioned, objective decision. Because only the people that oppose it will come. And what the conditional use rules say right now is, a conditional use shall be approved if the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the use can be mitigated. Well, it doesn't say eliminated, it says mitigated. And then it says, according to standards in the ordinance. So there's usually an attempt to try to put standards in the ordinance and difficult to apply them. But the time that we find that decisions are made that are toughest to defend is when it appears we've got discretion that we really don't have. And then the applicant thinks you have less discretion and the neighbors think you have more discretion. And so you just set yourself up for a challenge. Some entities do have conditional uses, but they have the staff make the decision. And there's the state law allows the planning commission to recommend to the city council what we call a land use authority. That is so the planning commission might be the final decider of the home builders and the realtors. The city council can't be the final decider on the subdivision. There were so many instances where the legislature felt that ability had been abused. They took that ability away from the city council. And now the city council simply can't be the decider on subdivision. So that means it has to be the planning commission. And you don't have to hold a hearing. If you do, that still means you have to approve an application if it complies. And then you get the problem where the audience says, why are you even having a hearing if you have to approve this? So.
But if the planning commission is the one reviewing it, how do we do that without having a public meeting? Because by law.
Well, you have to have a public meeting.
But not a hearing.
Not a hearing.
Got it. Okay.
No, absolutely. And that doesn't mean that in a public meeting, you can't invite anyone to speak. I mean, it doesn't prohibit public input. And although some people in some situations will say it does because they just don't want to start having public input. But what the law says is, when you hold a public hearing and it has to be a public hearing, then you must let the public speak. But in a public meeting, it's optional whether you allow people to speak or not. The main difference between a public meeting and public hearing is that notices go out saying we're holding a public hearing, so come and you will be heard if you speak. So but back to the issue of conditional uses, if in fact it looks like we can come up with specific safeguards that help most of the time, and put those safeguards in the ordinance as the aspects that are, that must accompany any permitted, a specific permitted use. My belief is that's superior than opening it up and saying, first of all, we've got to figure out what are the negative aspects of this use. Second of all, we got to figure out, can they be mitigated or not? And third, what reasonable conditions will we use to mitigate them? But those that don't understand the process will come in and say, well, just deny it. Well, the problem is, the applicant then goes to the courts and I can quote cases and says, well, those could have been mitigated. You couldn't deny it. And so, by the way, we want approval and we'd like some damages here too. How's that for a long answer to a short question?
Well, that's great. I mean, I'm sure you spent a lot of time on this. A quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
Presumably, in my mind, if to write ordinance that doesn't require conditional use permits would be, you'd have to add, the ordinance would have to be more robust, right? Because you're covering more
Yes.
ground and leaving less ambiguity. And as we're in a building moratorium right now, and as a planning commission, we're under pressure to present ordinance rather quickly, the next several months. And the current, what we're taking from the existing county code for our area has a fair amount of conditional uses. What advice do you have for us when we're kind of in this spot where we need to suggest code to the council fairly soon, but in the meantime to rewrite code that doesn't require conditional uses, it's going to be more labor intensive? And what's the balance between getting something out, but maybe it not being the best because it has more conditional uses, for example? How's that for a long question?
Well, just see how long the answer is. So it is fascinating to be very closely involved, at least as an observer, in what you're going through and to look at what you can do with a blank piece of paper. And let me offer one thought that you probably haven't heard before, but it's I think it's pretty clear in the law. And that is what we call the pending ordinance rule. You can apply an ordinance against an application if it's been placed on the agenda and formally considered, whether there's a moratorium or not. You can apply the ordinance before it's adopted. If it's clearly written and you know this is what we're proposing, then you can deny an application that doesn't conform to the pending ordinance as if it were adopted. You don't have to, it's optional. But if, for example, the moratorium is running 3 months and 3 months into it, you say, we don't have an adult business ordinance. And you decide you want to do that. I'm telling this as a personal story. I was the city attorney for Providence, which is up in Cache County. And Providence has a lot of wonderful people, and a lot of them go to Utah State. And somebody with a mindset that none of us in this room will understand decided, now there's the target audience. We're going to build an adult business here. We're going to sell all kinds of interesting information that these young men in particular probably don't have. So they started asking around, and our ears light up in Providence, and we go, whoa, wait a minute. We only have one commercial zone in the entire town. And anyone who comes in and makes an application is going to get approved wherever they want to in the city of Providence. And so we looked for an ordinance and thought, okay, we'll go to Provo. And we took Provo's ordinance and put it on the agenda, and that solved the problem. We did adopt an ordinance within 6 months, but we had something specific we were considering, and that took a little bit of time pressure off. This is a gift of the East. So if you are legitimately considering an ordinance and you haven't done it for more than 6 months, and you are doing it officially and formally, if you choose to, with certain applications.
Okay.
So anyway, that gives you some flexibility. I got off track there. But I understand what you're saying, and conditional uses are, it's not a clear subject. The city of Moab was beat to a pulp by the Utah Supreme Court in 2018 when they made a decision about a short-term rental without any evidence to back it. And so Moab said, okay, no conditional uses, period. We're not doing. The city of Murray, however, I was looking at a zoning map of Murray, and every use except residential had a C after the designation, like there was R3, and then there was C2C. And we're going, what does that mean? And they said, that means conditional. Every use in their commercial industrial zone was conditional. And I just think, not to beat it to the death, but I just think that's a little too open. So you may decide there are some things you just really need to make conditional use. In our little town, Plain City, somebody wanted to turn the old elementary school into a group therapy, a group living center for wayward boys. And I said to the city council as a resident, okay, they're protected in part by the Fair Housing Act. They have federal rules that will support their application. But those acts don't prohibit us imposing reasonable conditions. So let's create a conditional use for group housing, group homes. But my advice is choose it fairly carefully and then try to anticipate as much as you can.
Okay.
That's a good question, follow-up question on that.
Sure.
Would you recommend then for this first phase, if you will, of our zoning implementation, that we start on the conservative side of how many permitted uses we allow, knowing that we could always over time revisit and add them versus allowing too many permitted uses and then regretting it later? I mean, how do you suggest we do this?
You're focusing on exactly what you should focus on, and I have no business commenting to you on what you should do. It's a judgment call. I mean, there are certainly those who, the more libertarian among us who'd say, just look real hard before you prohibit anything. The irony, I used to be involved deeply in historic preservation. And in the mid-1970s, I took a picture of every single house in the avenues of Salt Lake City. And when Envision Utah did a survey later of what neighborhood in Utah sounded the best of all, the best, the avenues came up. Well, there wasn't any zoning when the avenues was built. The market just took care of it and did it as it, I guess maybe the restricting factor was horses. But it's hard to make that judgment call and decide what you want to allow and exclude, because it's hard for any of us to be so brilliant and wise as to figure all that out ahead of time. I'm doing my best to evade and taking too long to do it.
But I did want to follow up on what happened with Moab. If they took out all conditional uses in 2018, how has that worked for them? Is there any reflection?
Well, you can't have a short-term rental, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet they happen.
Well, their grandmother,
Mm.
they might have some that are leftovers that were permitted. And maybe a short comment on that would be of some interest. So once a use is established and it's legal, and it has to be legal, it doesn't matter how long it's been there if it wasn't legal. But in places that have been inhabited as long as the valley has been inhabited, there's a lot of uses established before there was zoning. And so the question is, are there uses that were established before the county zoning that were illegal under the county zoning as it was, and are now illegal under the city zoning? Those are non-conforming uses. And that's a protected property right. That's a constitutional issue. So if the use was established and was legal, then it can continue. But local governments can adopt processes. Ogden worked hard on this. They had a real problem a decade or two ago with all the student housing around Ogden, around Weber State. And a lot of it was actual, legitimate, grandfathered, non-conforming, and a lot of it was just ad hoc, you know. They come and build it and got away with it for years, decades. And so Ogden went through building by building, address by address, and they'd improved how long they'd been renting. They even pulled out the old directories, the poll directories from the fifties and sixties to show whether or not there were two addresses at that house. And if there weren't, then the city would say, well, then you don't have any evidence that your use was actually established at the time the ordinance was passed that prohibits it. And continuously used with no interruption of more than a year. Because if a non-conforming use is lapses for a year, then it lapses permanently, for what that's worth. Yes.
Sorry, I can put in another question. It's not on the top 10 list, but I'd love your opinion on implementing design standards in the ordinance, whether you think that's a good idea. If so, how do you approach it so that they're unambiguous but not so heavy-handed and dictating design, I suppose, at the same time?
Sure. It's interesting that it's often interesting to know that Old Glory waves over Savannah, Georgia and Monterey, California, where they will tell you what color to paint your door. I mean, what the courts have said is we don't want to be the planning commission. We don't get paid enough to do that. So pass any ordinance you want, almost. I mean, you've really got to interfere with somebody's fundamental rights before the courts are going to step in. I mean, non-conforming uses is one of those carve out areas, but generally speaking, those ordinances that restrict what you can do in New Orleans are perfectly legal. And it's a political decision, not a legal one, as to what you impose. So it has very practical aspects. And one of the things that's most difficult, and this is the hardest, you're in exactly the situation that makes it most difficult. Because you have high aspirations, incredible scenic values, and no staff. And in Park City, I mean, when you go to the Home Depot in Park City, you feel like you're in a whole different place than you do when you go to the one on Wall Avenue in Ogden. And those design controls from Summit County are absolutely and fully legally enforceable. And as far as advice on how to strike the balance, what matters the most and what doesn't, there's a practical issue of what you think you can enforce. There's a political issue of what the people will support. There's occasionally a legal issue, but again, usually it's a matter of interfering with somebody's vested constitutional rights. And there is a rule that it has to make some sense. There have been a few cases where the laws seem to be very intrusive and really don't accomplish anything. And that can be something the court might occasionally look into, but it's a political question.
But if you set the design standard and it is contrary to what somebody already has, are they automatically grandfathered in? Or can you somehow, you can't compel them to meet the new standard?
Right. Generally speaking, you can.
Okay.
The only way you can do that is if in fact you show a very compelling reason. So for example, one of the reasons the legislature got involved in non-conforming use legislation was because Provo really wanted to get rid of the short-term rentals. I'm sorry, the campus rentals, the housing. And so they basically outlawed every basement rental that didn't have an escape window. But they did it based on that health issue, that fire safety issue where you had to have an escape window. And it developed a lot of resistance, and the legislature then came in and started going down the line of all the characteristics of an apartment that you could and couldn't restrict. But generally speaking, it's really difficult to have somebody go back and change anything that's already in place. You need to have a compelling reason.
So my question is kind of along those lines too. So there is a general plan in place with ordinances and there are development agreements out there that have been approved associated with that.
Mhm.
Does that get tossed or can we use that as a framework? But not totally starting over,
Yeah.
correct?
Absolutely. No, that,
I mean, would you recommend that we use that as more or less a framework?
yeah, I was interested when you adopted ordinances from Sladeville, for example, if I understand that right. Rather than just adopting the weed ordinances
Right,
as they were, because then everybody would know exactly where they stand. And then you could methodically change it through pending ordinances or other choices. But the bottom line is, number one, the general plan is not binding on anybody. It's just advisory,
Mhm.
so only the ordinances count.
right.
And I mean, you certainly have the blanket opportunity to adopt anything in writing that you'd like to adopt, wherever it comes from. And it's legal and enforceable. But in terms of what's practical, the closest you can stay with what people are used to, of course, is a better process. And so if I understand right, the city's also continuing on with the same building inspection services and some other things the county was.
Through some interlocal agreements.
Yeah.
Yes, in this transition period, they've been great to continue the permitting process through Frontier and our inspectors. And some can engineer, we're gonna let those legacy projects kind of wind down a little bit and.
No, that's absolutely, I think, a good call, for what it's worth, and it's not a legal opinion, just my thought. In terms of development agreements, you have to read the agreement, but typically, the development agreement is made between the developer and the county, it's recorded. And it's probably transferable or assumable. And if that's the case, then the city simply steps into the shoes of the county. And the city then, if in fact it has to do with development and local control, and it's clear that that's the case, then the city can come in and agree with the developer to amend it. Not unilaterally, it would have to be with agreement with the developer to amend it. And the city can decide to enforce or to not enforce. So the flexibility the county used to have might transfer to the city. Although I'm just getting alarm bells off in my head thinking that's a general statement, and if I had a development agreement in front of me, I'd feel more comfortable making that kind of a statement. But generally speaking, I think the city would assume the role of the entity that could enforce the development agreement.
The development agreement would have to be prior to, so in this case, tied to Weaver County. Versus once we adopt a new land use ordinances, and if there's any amendment that's made on that development, it would fall under the new land use ordinances, right?
So that I'm just hesitant to think that once a development agreement has been in place and the city has been created and all the development agreement relates, let's say the developer has agreed to put in street improvements. Well, I don't think the county has any role in enforcing the agreement to put in street agreements, and the city has all the responsibility to do that. So it just seems logical to me, unless the agreement provides otherwise, that the city would step in. And some development agreements are long term, they go for
30 years.
We're finding.
But so there, some
You
of
have
these,
to read it, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, you have to read it.
so some of these developments are underway now and height restrictions were approved and does that continue?
Yes, once the developer's approved, and this is really essential to understand. I don't know what your deadline is to appeal a land use decision. It can be as short as 10 days. I haven't seen it longer than 45 days. But once the appeal period is passed, that decision is final. This is an administrative decision, not a legislative. It's a different story. You can't appeal legislative decisions generally because they have to bring up a constitutional issue. But the administrative decisions that are made, including signing those development agreements, once it's over, it's over. And then everybody lives with what was done. Just so you feel more comfortable sleeping.
That makes us all feel a lot better.
May I ask you a question about water? And point, early point for a will serve letter prior to getting a building permit.
Sure.
So is there any state laws?
I haven't heard of any state law, but I might, that's not an area I'm really familiar with. There might be one, but I haven't heard of it.
So we can put it up front and center prior to
I
pulling the
don't know
building
why
permit,
not.
if it's in an ordinance.
And are we able to require that to be wet water as opposed to speculative?
Yeah, so
Water.
here's the standard for that's really a good example to get into the weeds a little bit on legislative decisions. If it advances a legitimate state purpose, and you're being able to provide for utilities and future resources to serve the growth is absolutely no question a legitimate state interest. That's the only entity using it that has that interest other than the property owners themselves. So if in fact the city decides to put in those kind of requirements, the essential thing is that it be written down and adopted formally. Because again, the rule is if someone comes in with an application and they comply with the ordinances and the building code and your development standards, whatever's in writing and officially adopted, they have to be approved. So if a developer comes in and someone on the city council or in fact, the planning commission, if it's a subdivision approval, I'm going to provide the water when people have taps. Not now. I don't have to prove it. There may be state law. State law gets into this a little bit. So I think in the state subdivision statutes, it provides that no one has a right to a subdivision if they haven't shown they have the ability to provide the basic utilities. But the timing of that, it seems like is a good example of what could be up to the local ordinance. On the other hand, this is the wrinkle with legislation. There's just really two restrictions on legislative decisions. And one of them is the Constitution. You really only can challenge a legislative decision if it's in violation of a state statute, or we'll call it higher law, or the Constitution. If, for example, we make our building restrictions so tough that a person simply can't use their property, then we cross the line. Now, that doesn't mean use it for what they want to use it for. That means use it for something. So the classic case out of South Carolina was a builder who bought 2 lots on an inland waterway in South Carolina. And the South Carolina Coastal Council said, you're in the path of a future storm event. And so we're drawing a line in the sand here. And we're saying you can't build closer than this line to the high water line because we're worried about hurricanes and major storms. And so this developer, by the way, the line was behind the back property line. So all of the property was in the restriction. This goes to the United States Supreme Court, and Judge Antonin Scalia was quite poetic about it. And he basically said that is a taking absolutely flat out. So if a person is denied all use of their property, either because you eliminated it on the face of the ordinance, or because a combination of different rules applied against the property make it impossible and practical to build anything, then that's a taking. Except, let's say you own that lot in Draper. I mean, if there are compelling, countervailing reasons why it's an imminent threat to health and safety, then all bets are off. You don't have the right to create a public health hazard.
In your example, did that they put that ordinance in and then they wanted to build and
Well,
We're beyond
in
that,
that case, it wouldn't have mattered though.
you know,
Somebody could come along and buy that lot for 10 cents on the dollar and sue the government and win and get the full value of the lot. So it's inherent in the land. It's not inherent in the property owner. That's sort of this rule about no use, not allowing any kind of economically viable use. But
So they
building a
could
house
build
on,
in 100-year floodplain and have their home destroyed in the first hurricane, and that's
well,
something that a municipality would have to allow.
that's really a good example. So let's say that a person owns property and all of it's in the 100-year floodplain. And they come in and an engineer said, okay, I'm gonna build this house in a way that withstands the 100-year flood. Here's the proof. I'm an engineer. Here's the stand. Don't turn that guy down. But if in fact the property simply can't be used, if like that land in Draper or like these lots in Mountain Green, and I don't know, it's been a long time ago. And I don't know how that turned out. Then the local government has an interest to say, no, you've got to prove geologic stability in a way that no one's proved it before. So you can put it into their proof. And if they prove there's no hazard, and you don't, the interesting thing about decision making is local government gets the benefit of the doubt. If someone comes to you and says, this meets the ordinance, and one of the things I have to prove is a factual issue, like this ground is stable, and I provide the only evidence on that basis, then I'm, as a public decision maker, somewhat stuck. But if someone else comes in and says, no, the land's not stable, and I'm an engineer, and here's the stamp, now you've got the option to go either way. You just have to have substantial evidence on either side. And so it's not uncommon, like in Riverdale, where they had slide issues, for the city to now require a certification. And if the city decides they don't believe the certification, they believe it's biased because the developer paid for it, then the city can certainly engage another engineer and get another opinion. And if there's opinion on both sides, then the city can choose whichever side it wishes, as long as it's substantial evidence. That makes some sense?
Yeah, but ultimately, isn't the landowner like that? The picture you showed of the sliding house, I mean, that was the risk that the landowner was willing to take. The city, there's no liability on the city's part.
Well, unless they didn't know that risk was there prior to building, right?
Yeah,
That's part of the responsibility of the city, I would think, to have that information. I don't know, just ask them.
Yeah, would it be? Why would it be the city's then?
Well, the perfect example of that, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I don't know if any of you remember the slide just off the divide on the North Ogden side, like 30 years ago, when it just came down through there. Now what's there? Houses.
In the same house. In the same house.
So I've always wondered how that possibly could be passed, and because, I mean, that storm could happen again, that, you know.
well, the engineers convinced the local city officials at the time that it had been solved. And if in fact it had been solved, then the developer's entitled to approval if it fits the zoning. But remember, you got some background opportunity here. For example, in Solid County, they say they have what's called the FCAUS ordinance. They try to protect the canyons. And they say you can't build within a certain distance of a stream. Well, if your lot's in that distance and then you either need to get a setback variance to build some modest sized home, or they have to let you build a home if otherwise that setback requirement eliminates your use. So it's a balancing test, and most of the time those kinds of rules don't affect anybody so severely that you can enforce them and accomplish your goals. But occasionally you find the exception, and that's where the Constitution comes into play, where a person's entitled to some use. The alternative, of course, is to buy the land. The city has the power of eminent domain and the Constitution doesn't require that a person gets to do everything they want. It's that the compensation be paid if they can't do what they're legally entitled to. So one option is to let them do it, which is the usual choice because nobody wants to spend money. But another option is to say, well, you're right, we need to have an appraiser come and determine what your properties are worth, and we have fun. But I don't mean to confuse the legislative and administrative. Whenever we're in a situation where we're trying to decide on a specific property other than a rezone or a zone, like a zone map change, we're talking administratively. So we look at the rules in place. And if we have an ordinance in place that imposes that setback and it seems to work unduly harshly on a given property owner, then we can use the variance process to allow us, some construction within the setback. Or we can decide to use the parks budget to help acquire some more property for City Park.
To put that into a real world example here, so like if we, for example, created an ordinance that said you can't build a structure on a 30% slope, and someone's entire parcel is on a 30% slope, would that then say we'd be taking away their ability to use that property and they could sue the city?
Yeah, I can give you a case citation.
Okay.
It was in one of the Cottonwood Canyons in Salt Lake County. And the Court of Appeal said you've got to allow his engineer to design a building that will work.
Okay.
But if the land is not all 30%, then you can require him to build on the part that's not.
Okay.
You can prohibit the construction of land of structures on sensitive lands. It's just that if the entire property is sensitive lands, now you've got an issue that has to be sorted out.
That's good to know.
So if the county had a 30%, you cannot build on a 30% slope prior to us. Would that make any difference? No.
Not after the county rules are suspended.
Right.
I mean, the county rules don't apply here anymore.
But historically, I'm saying if the property owner owned it then and couldn't build, there is not an expectation that he could build now. And if we come up with an ordinance that says similar things.
Thanks for that follow-up. It's in the property. The property can't be permanently rendered unusable. Doesn't matter when.
Okay.
The Constitution is usually enforced ad hoc, that is on case by case. So when someone comes in for a building permit and they're told they can't use their land for the most modest use available, a house, then we have a constitutional taking question.
So the best time to catch that in the subdivision process, right? Where at that point, you could make the decision in the subdivision application not to allow lots.
Oh, absolutely.
Designed within the 30%.
Right, and so this is what we call zombie lots. They were created so long ago that nobody would ever build on them or use them. The summer home that we have here is in an area where there are dozens of lots up on the hill in the Avalanche area, up on the backside of Lewis Peak. And nobody ever built on those lots. They're just there because somebody created them, but they're zombies, they have no practical use. But you can require somebody who comes in and crazy enough to want to use it to prove that it can be viable. And you got the building code to start out. And the other, you can create geologic hazard ordinances like Morgan County had to do to deal with what happened in Mountain Green.
So the creator of those lots, for the example of the zombie lots, are they doing that in case you do have someone crazy enough to say, I want to build in that area?
It was done in the 60s, and who cared, I mean, they look, if you look on a map, it looks like they're lots. It's only when you look at them in the vertical. So they just did it because they could. And why do you think we got into the business of being so complicated in our rules? Because that kind of abuse occurred way back when. By the way, those lots are protected by easement.
If, as Tyson said, if we were to create an ordinance that said you can't build on 30% slope, then if someone came and said, look, that my entire lot's on the 30% slope, consider allowing the variance if they could bring somebody in to say they could mitigate that.
Right. Well, they're kind of separate things. You'd have to allow a variance so they could apply for the permit, and then in the process of reviewing has to be in code. And one of the things that's most common, and in fact, the current attorneys in the ombudsman office say this is the biggest issue that comes before them. And that is, we get this idea that because people have to come and get permits, that we're doing them a favor. And we don't, when we impose permits and restrictions, we're often doing it on behalf of the general public. And we're not necessarily doing a favor for the property owner. But when the property owner comes in for a permit, we get the impression, well, you want something from us. And in my mind, and by the way, I'm going way off into philosophy here, he's doing us a favor, he or she, by allowing us to regulate his property and not, whining any more than he has so far. But the issue is that we are in a situation where we need to try to understand that the courts look at it more often from the property owner's point of view. And certainly there are strong elements in the legislature that do. So we have to simply provide a good structure that makes as much sense as possible and is not just defendable legally, but makes good common sense as well. And one of the things that is a good thing to do sometimes is what we refer to as forbearance, that we can't solve every problem. And when I was in the city council, we called it slippage. One of the reasons the city council in Provo wanted to keep control of everything was because we wanted it done our way. And if we delegate, then there's going to be some slippage between what we want and where the person that's in charge of the decision makes. And somehow in the middle of all this process, we strike a balance in our American form of government and come up with some way that we solve a lot of problems without trying to solve every one, if that makes sense.
May I ask then, how do you bulletproof your
Well,
ordinance?
bulletproof.
You had mentioned other.
Well, and we can, yeah, I don't know how your time works, but
That's number
Yeah.
11.
Oh, is that-
You've got as much time as you want. We wanted to, we want this.
haven't worn out my welcome yet.
No.
So this is the phrase you remember and never forget, okay? Substantial evidence in the record. There are three important words there. When you make any administrative decision, you make a record. And the record includes all the evidence that was presented. Of course, there's usually a reporting of any hearing that was held. But all the documents that are submitted, all the correspondence, that's all part of the record of the decision. And that record is the only thing that a court or a hearing officer or board of adjustment will look at once the decision is challenged. Administrative decisions. Substantial means significant, more than a scintilla, something of some substance. What the court says is something a reasonable mind would rely on to make a decision. And substantial evidence is credible and it's relevant. And to the extent it can be impartial, that goes to credible. It's independent. And without substantial evidence in the record, your decision can be challenged. With substantial evidence in the record supporting the decision, it's bulletproof. So there's a gravel pit down in Utah County. And Kelshaw, I think is the name of the gravel operator. Is that right? Does that sound like a gravel operator?
Yeah.
Okay. They have an existing gravel or asphalt operation. And one of the nice things about Utah Valley is there is along the whole Wasatch Front is they're just an incredible wealth of materials. critical infrastructure materials, the legislature calls it, because they want to regulate it themselves instead of letting local governments do it. I digress. So anyway, these guys have an asphalt batch plant. They want to expand it, but they have a conditional use permit that allows them to expand it. They haven't yet, the conditional use limits the number of trucks that move every day in and out, but it doesn't limit anything else, let's say, in our example. So they want to expand it, and they need to put in some new hoppers. You know, these silos that hold the big materials that they put into the mixers and trucks. And there's a height limit. So they can either build 6 40-foot or 3 100-foot, let's say. And that's the only question. Do we impose a height limit on their operation? So they come in and they provide an application and they say, what are the negative aspects of our having a 100-foot tower instead of a 60-foot tower? Well, if we paint it the color of the background, and it's a long ways from anybody's house, we're struggling here to find anything that's any kind of a problem with a 100-foot tower as opposed to a 40-foot one. And so they come into the planning commission and the Board of Adjustment, both entities heard it, and simply explain, there's no negative aspects of this, there's nothing to condition. We're expanding the use, but we have the right to expand the use. So please say yes. So the neighbors came in and they owned the land down on the valley, you know, the part of Utah Valley that still exists, the stream. And they clamor. And so the planning commission turns it down and the Board of Adjustment turns it down. And the Court of Appeals said, why? What evidence is there in the record? You've got people that are in the industry that know this industry who are telling you it's not going to make a whit of difference in the number of truck traffic, the noise, the dust, or anything else. It's just a height issue. And we fully accept as substantial evidence what the applicant's telling you and what his engineers are telling you and what the operators are telling you. And in fact, in this case, this is a pretty smart applicant. The applicant came in with an appraisal. And the appraiser said, this is not going to affect anybody's property value one iota. And the neighbors stood up and said, you know, children will die. It's just going to destroy everything we've wanted to do here. And the Court of Appeals said, there's no way we can support the decision to turn this down. There was no evidence to.
Who was that court?
It was
That's
the
a state
Court of Appeals.
district court?
No, it's the Court of Appeals. The district court, I forget how the district court ruled, but the decisions that are published are all by either the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals.
So can I ask
Sure.
if in that scenario you just gave us, they had all the evidence of the things that you had listed, that would be substantial.
Oh, absolutely.
And the court would have
Yeah.
ruled for.
And that's what they said is the opinion of an expert in the field, even if he's the owner, is substantial because he knows his business and he has credentials. If a realtor comes in and says, this is how it's going to affect property values, that realtor, you know, has some background to make the comment. If someone who is not a realtor or an appraiser comes in and makes the comment, that is not substantial evidence.
So in that case where they had an appraiser that said this wouldn't affect, and they had gotten a realtor that said it would affect, how would the court go with two differing opinions?
That's a good question. Remember, this is a conditional use. And so under Utah law, the question is, can we mitigate it? Not can we eliminate it? So one of the things that happens, and this is important to understand, when you put that list of the uses that are allowed in the ordinance, you are stating in the face of the ordinance, we want these uses. They're desirable. We had thousands of different things we could have allowed in this zone, and we chose these. And we made the conscious decision to choose them. So we are blessing those uses. And when we allow a conditional use, we're saying, we also like this use. Or have to put up with it, that, well, we have public policy reasons why we listed it here. It's just that we want to review that case by case and impose conditions to mitigate the negative aspects of the use. But if we don't prohibit it, then the courts are going to say, okay, you want it there. So since the policy decision by the city council was made to allow the use, whether or not it's a good thing has already been decided. So now we're just deciding under what conditions we'll allow it. So generally speaking, with a conditional use, if we can't show that the negative aspects of the use can simply not be mitigated, then it wouldn't matter if there was evidence mitigated. And these guys are saying, yeah, we're gonna paint it the same color as the background.
And that's why you hear the negatives of conditional use permits, because of what you just said. There's so many ways in order to prove that it's okay to do, right? Yeah.
So if you articulate, if we were to articulate the permitted uses, those are certainly the uses that we say, yes, we want those. Inexhaustive, or again, if it's not permitted, it's not, if it's not a permitted use, it's implicitly not allowed.
That's a common phrase and it's commonly enforced and enforced. It's just when you get into the extremities. For example, in Sandy, there was a guy named Steve Brown, and this predates the internet. I remember those days, but you guys don't. Anyway, Steve Brown got and while they, come down and wouldn't have to pay the high prices of the snowbird around them. So this is before Airbnb, but not before the internet. So he and his buddies form an association where they advertise on the internet for overnight rentals. And Sandy City says, well, you can't do that. And so this goes to the Court of Appeals. It's in the book. Here that the residential neighborhood is for a peaceful, quiet family life. So you can't put a short-term rental in there. And the court said, I'm sorry, you've got to be a little more specific than that, because Steve's renting to families. He's just renting them for a day instead of a 30-day period. And you guys all know that people in Sandy are renting their houses all the time. They rent them for a year. Prohibiting what they said is because ordinances restrict the common law standard of open use of property, provisions in the ordinance that allow a use will be liberally construed in favor of the property owner. And those that restrict uses will be strictly construed against. You can say any ordinance not allowed is prohibited, and then you'll find someone who comes and says, well, really, this is a house. And you say, no, it's a hotel. And then you're into the weeds, you decide how you settle that.
So along those lines, as you read through the permitted uses, it's a little crazy of how specific it gets, right? Baby formula, knitting shops, all these things and we can't possibly think of all the possible uses. So is it sensible to keep that level of distinction just very deep, or would it make more sense to streamline and to the retail, light manufacturing, and then keep it more open to the ever-changing uses that might occur in modern day?
Well, for what it's worth, my observation is more is more. Everybody has a long list of those exact kind of things.
So the more specific. the
Yeah.
better.
So that,
Like daycare centers and preschools as separate things and those, that people in the business in the larger cities in particular get pretty deep into the details on what they allow and what they don't. And they probably just found it by experience to do that. And yet I'm not happy saying it because I wanted to see 100 pages go out of the Weaver County ordinance.
So can I ask you a couple of questions that
Sure.
maybe you've already answered and I just haven't? Is it possible for us to rezone form-based zoning that was put into the valley?
Yes,
We
you
can.
bet. Yeah, yeah. What you have to do is post the, again, you have a whole new zoning ordinance. And so if the new zoning ordinance that then you have pending right now includes design, form-based design, you can simply leave it out. In the time when your ordinance that doesn't have it in it is pending, you can enforce it without it. So really, it's quite remarkable. A person who sets up the agenda for the planning commission meeting by posting the agenda and saying attached is an ordinance that we're considering that doesn't have form-based zoning, has form-based zoning in it.
But what if it's already been established? The form-based zoning has already been approved through Weaver County.
Then buildings that are built can stay. And the development agreements that have been signed stay. And any application that was applied, that was filed, and the fees were paid, must be considered under the ordinances that were in place at the time it was filed and the fees were paid.
Okay, now we have the form-based zone that was approved, but no buildings have been built. No development has happened.
If no application has been filed, then a pending ordinance changes the rules. So that's the tension here. This is Utah the Utah Supreme Court. Western Land Equities versus City of Logan, 1980. If it depends on which comes in first, is it on the agenda and posted for formal consideration first, or did somebody pay the application and pay the fee? Whichever happens first wins. If there's no application, now this is a legal answer. This is not a political answer. This is not a moral judgment. You guys have to make some balancing decisions to try to decide how you're going to take the legal framework within you operate and apply it in a way that goes down okay. That's reasonable and practical and makes sense to you. But just as an attorney and someone that is a land use hearing officer for a bunch of different jurisdictions, if the application's in and paid for, then we're locked into our current zoning and rules. If it's not paid for and we have a pending ordinance, even more than an official ordinance, if we have a written ordinance under consideration that on its face prohibits this use, then the pending ordinance could be applied against an application that came in after the ordinance was placed on the agenda.
But
When you
there's
say
a-
application, you mean a building permit application as opposed to.
Subdivision permit, site plan application.
Yeah.
But approved and paid for.
Yeah, so like
There's-
they've already had their. If they already have their whole development approved or their whatever development agreement approved,
Yeah.
that's done. So
Right.
even if they don't have a building permit itself for each building yet, they still have
the development
the
plan is
development plan
already.
in place.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
So that whole shit is it.
It's said.
So there's a, what will we call it? Incremental vesting. So let's say, some cities, of course, are more complicated than you might. But for example, let's say in our subdivision ordinance, we have a concept plan, a preliminary plan, and then we have a final plat. So I come in for concept and you say, okay, you've applied under the density that's there, your density is locked in. And the goal will need to see a preliminary plan, and then you change your road ordinance and say, okay, we want 6 inches of asphalt instead of 5. If that changes before they apply for the part of their plan that applies to. That applies to them. That is. It's the part of their permit that haven't, because they have to apply for. That is
Okay.
the plans and specs. But we can't change the density. And we can't force them to take the change. If the applicant comes in and says, okay, I have a preliminary plat approval, but I want to make these changes and they conform to your ordinance, then you could say sure. In fact, you'd have to say sure. But if they say we want to change it and it doesn't apply to the new ordinance, then you could say no. The new ordinance applies to the part that you didn't have in your concept plan. Does that make some sense?
To do that, do we have to change the zone from the form-based village to something else?
No.
No, it'll just be each individual permit that comes in will be, if it hasn't been approved, if. So we have some big developments like in North Bay. I'll use that one for an example. It's got probably 800 units approved.
Yes.
So not all of them have had permits pulled.
Well-
But they have the development agreement.
Right, and that's why they have a development agreement.
Yeah,
And so typically, I mean, there may be ways that things can be tweaked around the edges, but typically. The decisions have been made and
Right.
there were attorneys on all sides of that. Thank you. It's just wonderful. But that's why there were so many attorneys involved to try to lock things in. Particularly in this climate where they knew
they were gonna switch, yeah.
But what you're saying, if there are design aspects that weren't explicitly stated in the development agreement, ordinance can still change those.
Yeah.
And have them.
I guess so. I'm getting way over the edge, aren't I here? So I'm talking generally, you're thinking, I'm in trouble.
Keep going, we got it here.
Well, yeah.
I guess the reason I'm interested in it is because my investigation of form-based zoning so favors the developer to the detriment of the city. That's my feeling about it. That it's a frustration to me that I am hoping that as a new city, we could somehow impose or that could limit or possibly even change what is available in a form-based zone.
We can get rid of form.
You don't have to adopt it.
But it's already there. I mean, it's already,
But I think what he said is, it's already there for what is already vested. It's not already there going forward if we eliminate it, right? So what's done is done,
kind of,
unless there are things that haven't, that there aren't ordinances. That there aren't ordinances and we put ordinances into effect that don't apply, that aren't are already articulated in the development agreements.
okay, but my understanding at the end of all of the form-based zoning agreement with Weaver County, that at the last minute, they added in an amendment that said that this development could not be affected by the new city. Am I reading that, have I understood that wrong?
No, you're right, that's where her statement of done is done, but going forward.
That one's done is done.
Okay.
But there can be, but it's up to us if there will be a next one.
Yeah.
But what's done is done.
Okay, got it.
Does
Now I
that
understand.
make sense, Jerry?
Yeah, now it does, it does.
Back to a specific issue there. These things, that's why. These things are.
It might just take more.
In this case, that. So it's surprising to me if they left a lot of loose ends that they could have tightened up. That's generally what you would expect in a situation like that, where they have different attorneys help me.
With building, it's like, so with the planning board passport saying you need 20 parking spaces. If that hasn't been,
Speak a little bit slower.
sorry, if the planning commission didn't say you haven't broke ground yet, everything's been approved under form of zoning inspector. But now we require 100 parking spaces per building unit. Since that hasn't been permitted yet, could that be changed to make that the
The things that lock in early are density and building configuration. And some came in and said, okay, let's say it was in an area that had no dark sky ordinance. And the city passed a dark sky ordinance. The fixtures that had been planned to go on those would have
Stress. Things like building height. They were approved.
to go back, right? Because they, and specifically with those things that are integral to their financial planning. You know, that's a very significant part of how this thing's supposed to pencil. So that's in my mind, very unlikely to be successfully challenged. But having said that, I don't know the documents, I haven't read.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
but that's my impression, for what that's worth.
That's a dark sky ordinance question. So, I think it's pretty straightforward, the design standards for exterior of buildings. Can we deal with these glass box lanterns where the light is emanating from the inside of a space and impacting the dark sky? I haven't seen that really effectively
It would-
managed in improvements.
Again, those Home Depots in places like Summit County, they had to comply with the rules that were written. But you've got to write the rules. If you carefully write them.
So you can dictate the light quality and quantity
just
coming
have
out
to
of
come up
the
with
interior of the space.
objective criteria. The problem is when it's subjective, that's the part that's hard.
The other part is enforcement, and
Absolutely.
having people to enforce those. Because it's like, high schools
Exactly.
and stuff have cell phone policies, but hardly any of them enforce
That's you
those.
guys.
I'm just saying, that's,
And
but
then-
that's also something.
Is dark sky even ordinance at this point, or is it more
Yeah.
suggested?
It is, no, we have dark sky ordinance.
Okay.
And which we need to review more details and see if we think it needs anything additional. And I think that we can all probably think of some instances where it could be enforced.
We have some hovering spaceships in the valley. Down lighting.
Those places that I wake up in the middle of the night because it's like, God, what's out there?
They
They
could translate that into substantial evidence of the record.
Yes, yes.
But it's all the rage in the architecture now, the mountain luxury, all the big windows.
Right.
Light just pouring out of them.
But there is an ordinance that you'll review as part of this.
Yes.
Okay. And here's another little hot button. Do you have any wisdom on short-term rentals? A good way to ordinance them, and also how do we put teeth in the ordinance that'll?
Well, it's only money.
Pardon me?
And it's a good example of where you have staff limitations and it's difficult. And one of the things you're doing, and again, you've asked me to philosophize. The problem is, it's so difficult in the situation we're in to raise people's expectations. And by this, I mean the neighbors. We were kind of closing through major catharsis on this, particularly because of the concerns here in the valley. And it's one thing to come up with an idea of the way the world should be and another to actually implement it. and another to try to deal with those who gave the impression that we actually could change the world. So it's something that local officials make major decisions about. The legislature has said if you want to prohibit them entirely, you can. And those that are worried about the cost of housing have often said we need to deal with this because so often housing is just desperately needed in Moab or even in St. George, when we sell all these places. The landlords, the owners are getting so much more money out of short-term rentals than they could from renting it to a farm or a nurse that we're defeating ourselves. And so places like Grand County and Moab have stopped, drawn a hard line and said no more. But those guys have revenue streams that we don't have here to try to enforce it. So, like it's only money. If they're absolutely prohibit every new one, as long as you take the time to make sure that you can weed out those that are sort out those that are legal and entitled to because they were created before they were prohibited.
Well, again, if you have a subdivision that allows that already, you can't go back and. Though, right?
That's another question entirely. The court. The issue depends, right? Because the homeowners association, those are wonderful creatures. They consider themselves public or provide public records or do things in open meetings and I'm on the homeowners board for Spring Mountain. But the basic idea is the legislature waded in and said, you can't prohibit somebody in your HOA from renting their house. When my mother died, the HOA tried to prohibit us from renting, and she died in 2007. Can you imagine how difficult it was to sell her home in 2007, 2008, through that period? And the legislature weighed in and said, you can stop short-term rentals HOAs, but you can't stop somebody from renting it. It's just too big an intrusion into what the normal range of what property owners are entitled to do.
But it is, I think it is a hot button in our valley with a different issue because the short-term rentals, more traffic, more volume in cases, number of people in smaller units for a few times and whatnot. And I know I've heard from some subdivisions that they like to flip it and, where they do allow it, and haven't allowed it. How would they change that? I mean, that's not something off the top of the plan.
Well, and when we talk about rules that it's applicable to everybody and they're pretty clear. HOAs are a whole different world. An HOA is contract association. So you got to read every contract. And if the contract says you can't change this and it's not against the law, it depends on what those CC.
What are the legal reasons that a house could be liened? Could you incorporate that in any way to controlling STRs? Could you lien a house if they didn't pay their fees or?
Yeah, there's a whole kind of structure that's available that some cities use called civil enforcement. What that means is, in the old days, what we used to do is say, okay, we created a law and if you don't obey it, it's a misdemeanor. or an infraction.
Mhm.
And we try to enforce zoning like we do traffic rules. And I'm old enough to remember those days. But then somebody came up with a bright idea, wait a minute, let's just do it in civilly. And the only remedy is a fine. And then they would impose draconian fines.
Mhm.
Sometimes just really substantial, like if you don't mow your lawn. I'm thinking of a lady who made national news, but she fell off the porch while the city's zoning inspector was trying to enforce the mow the lawn ordinance in Orange. But anyway, these ordinance can approach beyond what might be reasonable or practical, but they start imposing fines, saying if we cite you for having weeds, then you have 5 days to cure, and then we start imposing fines. And the fines are $100 a day, and if we give you a second warning or a second infraction, it's $200 a day. And I mean, it gets up to where within a year or two, you owe more than your house. It's like the HOAs try to get away with sometimes, but local government does it. But I'm focusing too much on the most negative part of it. Most local governments have found it to be a good balance to use what they call civil enforcement, where they use fines, I hope are moderate and reasonable, to encourage the right conduct by property owners. And usually it has to do with nuisances or things that can be objectively measured. But they have to employ a zoning inspector or some kind of a marshal to ride around and make sure that if something's noticed that she can respond to it. And often, for better or for worse, it's done on a complaint basis,
Right.
which the courts have not said is completely out of line because of our limited resources.
Mhm.
But there are some people who, of course, would be much easier to explain all that than I'm able to. I just kind of heard rumors and don't know words.
I guess what I've been hearing, I've been writing up the gondola and talking to that the fines often associated with short-term rentals are insignificant in comparison to the amount of money that they're making. So it's easy for them to pay them and ignore them, right? And so I keep thinking if we can ordinance somehow and really put some teeth in it so that it hurts. Dark. And that's why my brain went to, can you clean a house?
Collector, you can put a lien against that house.
I think.
This isn't about short-term rentals. We sold property in Salt Lake, a condo in Salt Lake, purchased a condo in East Lansing, Michigan, because our daughter started medical school there. And
Go Michigan State.
yeah, and they have a very significant process for rentals. I don't know the short-term rentals sort of thing, but it's such a big college town that college student rentals are a big thing. And so is it, I mean, it seems possible that we don't create fees though, right? We wouldn't create licensing fees. That would be.
Yes, you would.
We would create
licensing department.
But no, the planning commission would, but the city would. So but when we purchase, I mean, my realtor warned me up front. You don't want to put this in your daughter's name? No, we don't. Then she's gotta rent it from you, and if she wants a roommate, you have to apply for a business license to rent all of the things. And it's pretty significant. They have different levels of rentals that you have to apply for which level of rental you want. They inspect your property, send in a team of inspectors to make sure that it's all up to code. And you have to renew that license every year and have a brief re-inspection annually in order to maintain your license. And while it was onerous for me from here, they were very cooperative when I said, hey, I wanna fly in for 3 days, can I get this done? It was onerous, but I appreciated it because, and I did have to get a letter from my HOA to say, yes, we're okay with you renting because the HOA said owner occupied, but can you have areas? Can you have areas of zones that require your properties to be owner occupied? East Lansing appears to,
Well, I think we're talking about Utah.
right?
And Utah law and the Utah Supreme Court.
Okay.
The Utah Supreme Court did rule that the city of Provo could require that student rentals could only occur in some neighborhoods where one of the units was occupied by a woman.
Mhm.
And that was upheld.
Okay.
And, but it's, situation by situation. I don't believe it would be practical or legal to eliminate all rental. I just think it's too big a burden to impose on a profit.
How are things working in Moab?
I don't know.
We don't know.
But the thing is, they have so many grandfathered short-term rentals. And now, basically, they have to put all the short-term rentals that are there and pay to license them and manage them too. I mean, maybe they pay enough that they can provide the to pay for staff.
Mhm.
When we were in Monticello a couple of years ago, they said there were 220 short-term rentals in Monticello.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. You really want to dedicate yourself to that project if you want to get a handle on that.
Well, thankfully Mount Green has turned into the short-term rental.
Yes.
But maybe not, I mean, maybe that's gonna be a blessing for us.
Yeah, but to follow up on code enforcement and violations, I thought Weber County then, after so many notices, notified and sent a letter where they would have to appear in court.
If they wanted to do it in a criminal court, yes.
So we could still have that option.
You can do the criminal option, civil enforcement option.
Okay.
They're two different things.
They're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Oh, so we could use a little bits of each.
Yeah.
So that's an option I think we can go.
Yeah,
if we want
there's a lot
put
more
teeth
discussed there,
in it.
but
Yeah.
So I have a question on another topic. If you still have
I
more
think we're
questions, go ahead. Bobby Porter,
we could talk a lot.
Craig is done here. What are your thoughts on TDRs?
Well, it's a great tool that's worked really well in some places. I represented a client that had a incredible, that made an incredible investment. They own 200 acres immediately adjacent to Old Town Park City.
Wow.
And now it's protected by a conservation easement, and the Summit Land Conservancy and the voters of Park City, not the people that own all those homes that pay the tax, by the way, just the voters, borrowed $50 million and bought the conservation easements. And TDRs are a variation of that, of course, where you try to cluster the development. And one of the problems I get by reading the Valley Facebook page is that local people want to see the transfer of development rights from a place where you actually could develop to a place where you otherwise couldn't. And there's a public perception in some cases that the rights that are being used really weren't practically buildable in the first place. But you know more of that than I do. But it's a great tool. It's complicated, and so it can be expensive to go through the professional details that are necessary to put it in place. But this isn't the kind of place as Park City is, where it can be a really powerful tool. And Park City's kind of pioneered that whole process and set the stage for Utah.
Why is it complicated? To me, it seems pretty dang simple, the whole idea behind TDRs, like, because we don't have a huge geographical area. It would be pretty easy to just look at a map and say, here's what we've got, this is what's available. And if it's anything on, hillsides that are unbuildable, and that these are what is available for TDRs, if you happen to own a farm on that area, this is what you can do. And if not, then, and then you just take inventory Because it's such a complicated issue we've had.
Well,
I get. But going forward, I don't see why we're gonna make it so simple thing to put in place.
yeah, and I think maybe my complication impression, again, it's just an impression, is because of how difficult it is politically to get everybody on the same page. And if, as you say, if you just took the valley floor and said, okay, the population of the valley right now is 10,000, and we think it can eventually go to 20, and that's all. And 10,000 more people means 4,000 more homes. And right now it's zoned for 4,000 homes on 3-acre lots. If you want to consolidate those homes, we're still going to allow the 4,000 homes. But if you want to consolidate them and make better use of the property, we're all for it. We might even give you a density bonus for that. Or you could say, well, we're going to create zoning that only allows for 3,000 homes, and people who want the other 1,000 homes go provide more open space than others and do it through a TDR program. It's staff intensive, of course, it takes a lot of professional help, but it in concept is pretty simple. I guess what I was reflecting is how difficult it is for the average person to understand that kind of a concept and how it's supposed to work in the place right next to their house. All they know is, gosh, I'm really glad that 40 acres of hillside is nice, but why do I have 4 townhomes right next to my house?
But the county did something, didn't they inventory? Charlie, didn't you do some sort of valley inventory? Kind of did those density counts. I remember seeing a bunch of maps.
I think they created an overlay. Concepts, but I think the driving force was economical, because like you need a city to over into this area over here. And I think with Craig mentioned I lost my thought. Yeah, anyways. I think it comes down to financial incentive.
But I would,
Oh, wait, what I was gonna say is that you have to educate the public, so one thing I think Weaver County may have dropped the ball on this, because TDRs were proposed a long time ago in Weaver County, like, this was a plan to say, hey, this could work. But then that was it, there's no education, you know.
So no ordinance.
well, okay, so when the general plan that was, I think, passed in the late 90s talked about the scenic wildlife corridors. Most of the hillsides were in 40-acre zoning. And at some point in the next iteration of the general plan, it got changed to, we want to see the open space on the valley floor and do more density and allow much greater density on the hillsides. And so you commented about the truly undevelopable land that somebody owns. If you bought all of that undevelopable land, and then could you say, well, I have this many development rights, I'm going to put them on the market. Not terribly dissimilar to Ogden City, who has commercial property at the end of our Stringtown Lane, and it's commercial property and they have TDRs there. There's no way that they want, or probably health and, the health department would allow those TDRs to be utilized because it's on top of the wells that the water goes down to Ogden City. So now that those TDRs are supposedly going to go on the market so that somebody can buy those and plant them somewhere else.
We disapprove that.
Yeah, that's already been.
Well, but it stopped at the county, didn't it?
No,
Yeah, but it's not buildable.
Right. Right.
those
You can't
get
put sewer in there.
outside.
I'm sorry?
I think the decision on that was transferred outside of the valley, either to a resort, ski resort.
Yes, and you have to go to Snow Basin.
Yeah.
Okay,
But the county did approve that they could sell those,
No,
even though they're undevelopable.
I don't think so, because that was a big deal.
Yeah, we'll have to follow.
Yeah.
yeah, what,
I agree.
what about-
Examples there.
what about the steep slope? Okay, the steep slope that is really not particularly developable, or maybe one house is developable if you have the right spot. But the acreage is there. Does that lot get a number of TD based on what is really legitimately buildable, or just by space?
No, but I think that was the problem, is that the TDRs, it's been abused.
Right, but I'm asking what can
Point where
we,
it's
what
just
do we need to,
nonsensical.
but do we need to address that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what we need to.
It's a huge issue. that-
Yes.
We can some ordinance to exclude those.
It's huge.
Yeah, we need to
Yes.
TDR ordinance.
Yes.
Make it way tighter.
The bottom line is, the law doesn't take into account practicality.
Right,
So
we have to.
it is whatever the law says works.
Okay.
So if you don't want that kind of situation, it must be carefully crafted so you don't open up that situation, because if the situation's there and someone wants to take advantage of it, and they file an application, then their rights are vested.
Would that be an example of substantial evidence and record?
Sure, well, that's more of a legal question. If that hillside is zoned for, put it some. Buildable is irrelevant if the law clearly says there's a value there that someone can trade. But there are substantial and insubstantial legal opinions maybe, but it's not evidence. It's just an argument.
If we were to reassign density, for example, let's say went from 3 acre lots to 9 acre lots. Could that be? People seem to be sued for saying we've taken away financial development.
As long as you let somebody with 8.5 acres build.
Okay.
In other words, a vested right, an existing pre-existing lot, a non-conforming grandfathered lot could still be built on. But anyone else that has 27 acres now can't build 9 lots. They can only build on 3.
And there's no.
On its surface, there's no legal issue there.
Okay.
But
They're for a fight.
if you want, if you want your friends on the council to be reelected.
So. Brian, a couple of minutes to talk to us, but if there are any other pressing questions?
Really quick on
Yeah.
the. Number 2, when do we have to have a public hearing? Could you tell us that really?
You must hold a public hearing for the council. And the planning commission under Utah law has to hold a public hearing. The city council never has to on the land use issue. And the planning commission requirements are zone change, changing the text of the ordinance, and zone change, I mean, change the map, change the text, annexation, general plan. There must be at least one public hearing.
And
So as
apparently to approve our minutes.
Oh.
Because that's what Sharon just said.
Yeah, just in the land use.
What you need is just a public meeting instead of a work session.
A public meeting, okay, thank you.
But I don't know anybody that doesn't hold public hearings anyway in front of the city council before they make legislative decisions. It's just not good form.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not well accepted for someone to run on the political platform of saying, elect me and you'll never be able to speak in a city council meeting.
But and so before we send it to the city council, we need to have a hearing for each.
You must have a hearing on each separate issue.
Okay.
If you look at the whole ordinance and have a public hearing on that. But if you do it in incremental motions, I think you need to have hearings on the steps you take.
Thank you, that's all.
Safe harbor there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. You guys-
Well, happy back.
Yeah,
Very helpful.
thank you so much.
Well, it's always such a pleasure. I feel my blood pressure go down as soon as I go over the divide, you know. But really nice to be here.
Yeah.
Lower blood pressure and that.
Thanks.
So next is discussion of progress reviewing the general plan and current zoning ordinances during the past week and Brian was going, it has a couple of things that we asked him to do for us, which is to create a comparison between the existing general plan and the draft that we have that has been worked on by numerous people going forward, and so that to make it easier for us to say, what are the ideas? Here's what we have, here are the new ideas, try to give us a jump start on what we need to do, because time is of the essence. And then also to create he's gonna tell us the format that he would like us to use when we are reviewing ordinances, and he's gonna get that format together and put it in the files that brilliant Angela put together for us to keep all of the things. Brian, take it away. Thanks, sir.
Right. Let's see if I sit here, can we see you?
Yeah, come in the.
Lincoln, say you're good.
I'll do.
Okay, really quickly. I will email everybody, or I'll put a copy of this in the SharePoint drive. I'll do both. I'll email you a copy and send, but we did a comparison of the old 2016 plan and the draft rewrite for 2026 that the mayor and several citizens put quite a bit of time into. There is a lot more information in the 2026 copy that is out there than in the previous plan. So there's been a lot of new language inserted. So there are some considerable differences. I've got this table that shows, most of them are administrative. They change Weber County to Ogden Valley City. There's a little more historical context. It talks more about dark sky, agritourism, things like that than the previous plan did. Land uses are heavily expanded. The newcomer information on growth projections, carrying capacity for the community, things like that. For rural residential and residential housing, there's a more rust there, more talk about short-term rentals and how to enforce those. And a much larger set of goals and implementation actions that the previous plan was lacking. For commercial development, again, there's more requirements in terms of architectural themes, limiting certain types of developments such as big boxes. Transportation and mobility talks a lot more about alternative transportation, active transportation. Utilities and public services has a lot more detail with additional geologic data, more upgraded wildland urban interface, wildfire standards, things like that. Much more information on parks and trails in the new plan. There's an entirely new chapter on resource management for public lands, habitats, sensitive lands, socioeconomic impacts, things like that. There are new maps referenced in the new document, but I haven't seen any actual new maps. We're going to have to draw a lot of those, frankly. But it does talk about including a lot more of that visual element. So.
May I clarify for everybody, my understanding of this, Chad, the draft that was in there was written by one person, it wasn't reviewed by many.
Okay.
It was, the mayors both had the assignment to rewrite the draft. And this was Shannon's draft, so no, it was, pardon?
Oh, I'm saying, oh.
That was my understanding,
Okay,
that was my understanding.
Does this not include all of the feedback that?
There wasn't feedback, but
There was no feedback.
There was no feedback, so the mayors took a shot at it.
But
So we had Janet's.
There was.
was.
There was a group of files that were edited by the transition team volunteer group.
Oh, possibly before we
I
got.
don't know.
So you're saying the two mayoral candidates took that general plan, took all those comments from the
Maybe they
group,
did.
I think. and
Maybe
then
they did, we'd have. to
They
check
advanced
that.
that to what Brian's, comparing side by side with the old one now.
Not sure.
Well, this was Shannon's, I know, Janet's was lost in a computer problem.
She went up to, she posted on cloud and lost her.
Yeah, so we had trouble with that one, so this was a little more limited, but Angela would know about the transition team, I came in after that. But we may have looked at it a little bit as candidates, but not a lot,
Okay.
so did you as a candidate, I mean, we didn't look at
Well,
it.
I did on the transition team version.
I looked at it a little, Tia said she looked at it a little, so.
Yeah,
You know, just know, it hasn't been far and wide. So please take a look at it. Yeah, we want.
so you're saying you don't think that nobody can find the one that was on the transition?
Oh, it's here. I didn't, yeah, I thought he had, but you don't.
Nobody's been able to find that?
No, well,
We have-
Angela just said that she has it, and maybe you need to send that to Brian and see if, is that what we think we need
I'm
to
not
do?
saying we don't have it. I
But it wasn't
didn't know that he
vetted.
didn't have it.
Right.
So I can get it to him.
that makes sense right there.
Yeah,
that makes sense, and,
Angela, I don't know which one you're.
Well, no, there was the whole volunteer group, but I facilitated one of those, I know it
And it
happened.
had comments on it.
Got it, so that one I haven't had. but
Okay.
Brian would benefit from having that, and you guys too, should
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah.
I just wanna be very
Yeah,
clear.
it's
about
not on.
Thank you for sharing
It's
that.
not on the Word shared, so I'll be sure to get it uploaded.
So if you, is it in the transition folders that we all worked out of? In like the planning ones, cause I have access to them still, I can try and find it.
It would be there under the team 3 work, in the edited, yeah. Yeah, there's a command
Do
section.
you remember what the files called, was it like general plan or something like that?
If you can find it, could you send it to all the planning commission?
Yeah, it's like a
Council
There's a
there?
folder, there's a.
And
Oh,
I-
okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I know it's to the full, but we haven't been able to get it into that for a month, couple months.
It's, I'm hoping that that's what Shanna took those comments, but.
Right. And
there was no notation in terms of who made what
Yeah.
changes,
the copy that I
had, so it was all.
Right,
Yeah,
and
it's
she
about-
hears me, I can call her and ask if we wanna find out how much, that went into that, but just so you know, we didn't go out far and wide.
Okay.
That I know.
okay,
I'll go over that whole team 3 and put it in the planning commission folder, okay, and
Yeah, we can work together and make sure there's so much information here. It's not buried.
What's the last way, best way to get a lesson in recommendation for this modification in the 26 general plan?
Well, we would need to go through his suggestion of our edits
It
first.
needs for you to give recommendations into it,
Into you, so you guys can evaluate whether.
That's a good question.
Put in there or not.
as far as using the community to allow to them to give recommendations into it.
Well, I almost feel like that already happened though before when we were doing
well, it did happen during the transition period,
right.
but I don't think that necessarily means that we're done
No,
letting anybody else provide any thoughts and input.
At the minimum, you will have an additional public hearing.
right,
Where the public will be allowed to provide comment. They don't have to provide that by standing up and speaking.
Right.
They can provide you with written copies
right.
of suggested changes.
Is
So
it reasonable to find a central location where he can put things in, or others can put?
Well,
I don't know.
just a quick review of the history, the general plan was built on robust community engagement at 26.
That's true.
We're just trying to fix it by getting rid of some technicalities, the canyon, or slopes. So we're really not changing it until we see if we get that TAP grant coming in April or May, and then we'll get it out to the community and let everybody think of it.
Well,
But I think the understanding was that we take what we have and get started, because the real work is the ordinances and the zones.
I just want to make a comment, I don't know if I can make a comment, but I did something very similar, I looked at the existing code. And one thing that we haven't, we have in place, we didn't have then or two, 3 water studies. And these water studies are pretty significant, and nothing in them is actually incorporated in those plans. And so we will have an opportunity here with this updated general public participation process to update that plan. But I would like to propose some intent, water quality intent statements into the interim general plan that kind of leads us in that direction as far as water quality incorporated into the study. So I'd like to get that to someone so they can look at it and see it's worthy of.
And there, thanks for being here tonight, Les, because I know you approached me with, and this is the Ogden Valley Watershed Action Group that I agree, there's a lot of really good information and some of it's new. And I'm wondering, could it be appropriate for this group in the not too distant future to have some of that information presented to us in a just an informative presentation, so that I'll disseminate that information for us to read. But as far as it being in a public hearing, would you guys be interested in having a short presentation?
Yeah, I would.
On that information?
I would.
And I will say, I would like to get someone, I do have a product where I have some recommendations for this interim general plan. The general plan with participation from the public, so hopefully gratifying, but also some specific intent code that goes with some of the sections of the ordinances. So I want to get that in front of you, and you guys can look at it and either throw that in now, or we get to it down the road as it is.
So this isn't just an individual. This is a group that's been in effect for, let's tell us a little bit about the group and how it came into effect, just quickly if you would, so they know. You started telling me the Weaver River.
I don't want to get off the subject.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I will for you. Ogden Valley Watershed Action Group is volunteer effort here locally. We were approached by a Weaver River Partnership to basically take over grant they received for education and outreach effort, so that we can basically get EPA 319 grant money. So we do have $40,000 to spend here in the valley on the education outreach effort. So that's what we're acting on right now. However, it also fills requirements in the Redfish 9 element plan, and that's framework that allows it gets triggered when we have impaired water. So for example, we do have impaired water. So we have basically it's part of this 9 element plan too. So at some point UGS hydrology study will definitely be part of our next general plan, because there's some significant findings in there before we get this information. And also, of course, maybe the Weaver Basin Conservancy District, Bowman Collins water and infrastructure study will most likely be part of that general plan. So I want to make sure you guys know that that's going to be on the radar going forward. And the things that I propose here for the interim aren't anything earth shattering, changing ordinance, but they get us looking in that direction with some intent statements.
I misspoke though, and correct what I said. I misspoke before you jumped in. Not getting this out to the public to redo was one thing.
Yeah.
But adding critical pieces that we need, we're gonna need I think some water infrastructure not infrastructure, that's the wrong word, water quality statements, that we need to include in this plan. So this may be very good, this is very good to hear from Les and to find out what we need to put into this plan.
And it's for our consideration.
Right, Brian, is that true? Don't we have to add some water elements in our ordinances?
It's not an ordinance, but once the city reaches 10,000 people in population, you have a water use and preservation element that will be a required portion of the general plan.
Does that include stormwater? Yes.
Stormwater is a whole different ball of wax. That's you are, due to the community size, you are probably already under stormwater. Those are federal and state stormwater regulations.
And to make a comment, Weaver County, general plan and also the ordinance today are primarily on, water, stormwater and dealing with water quantity, not quality. And so, look at the ordinance, it's the same thing. And you mentioned there's a right hearing, element, ordinance section. But again, it's not like, we're not, these are old codes based on old general plan. It's time to update them. And, there's a way to do that. I think we'll get to.
He made a great website.
Yeah, there's a great
And
website.
then I
I
have a Facebook page.
Should I share that already?
And look for articles in the paper that they'll be submitting, they're doing a great job educating people.
Yeah.
And then how many times a week,
Twice.
for your meeting over at the library?
Yeah, twice a month, go over.
And that's in the calendar of events, so.
Separate minutes and.
So.
Hi,
Les Vieira.
I was gonna say, can I get your name for the record, just to make sure?
I'm sorry, Les Guerrero,
Okay,
1,000 North Huntsville.
okay. I think I've talked to you before, but since I don't recognize you, I'm sorry.
It's a win.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, Brian.
I think that any information that he could get to us at a planning commission would be valuable now.
Okay,
Not that we might incorporate it, but at least it gives us that option to incorporate it. And
And
it educates
educating
us,
us.
it just educates us.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
and I think a presentation to us, if you could keep it concise, not get out there too much, would be helpful to us to know how we might use it to even word into the general plan.
Does anyone feel differently than that?
No, I think it's great. I think we are on a tight time frame just to get the general plan moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think we're all on board with water quality. There's
Okay.
any fight against that, but we just need to be efficient.
Right, okay.
And I just put all of the general plan information from the transition team is now all on our shared drive. If you go back a step, Brian.
Oh, I just passed it, didn't
That
General plan info.
That's everything, that's
Okay.
all the reports, all
okay.
the edits, everything that was done.
I? All right.
Okay.
So we'll do a quick reevaluation with that context.
Okay, thank you.
So there was that protection on utilities that, you know, if that's in there, Angela, that Miranda Mendez,
Like, this is everything.
created and I commented on, and we had given that to Janet.
Will you look through and see if you can find it? This is everything.
I
that
will,
was in the
okay,
general
if it's
plan
not, then I'll
folder.
send that around too.
Okay,
You have more ready?
Brian, yeah, we have.
Right, Brian.
So the last thing that I wanted to show you was looking at working versions of the zoning ordinances that we have. Now, what I have not done is struck any of the comments that were by previous residents. Oh, sorry, I should turn off my night view. But what I've done is I've turned track changes on essentially. So anytime anybody logs into this document, and you can all open it simultaneously. That's the cool thing about being on SharePoint is if you open, you know, if you are in this folder, you know, this Ogden Valley City Council Planning Commission draft ordinances folder, and you pick, you know, one of these ordinances. We might want to clean these folders up and get rid of some of these.
We can all look at it at the
But-
same time.
But yeah, you can all look at it at the same time. You can all
edit it at the same time, and you'll be able to see what other people are changing too. You'll see little flags and they'll be in different colors. Like for example, you should hopefully get this little message that pops up in the corner that says track changes are enabled. I haven't figured out how to lock it. I don't know if it's a permissions thing. I'll talk to Kathy. So here in the corner where it says reviewing, don't turn that off. But I can start typing all kinds of stuff, and it shows up. My changes will show up in blue. Yours might show up in green or pink or yellow, or the. Who's making them?
I think that the confusion is there are several, as you can see within the folder, there
Yeah.
are several versions. I think we need a clean one without the community comments. We can review those, but then make
okay.
Look at them side by
Totally
side.
agree.
clean document that's just
Yeah.
fresh without prior comments. from
Okay,
anybody.
so
So we can call it OVPC or some other designation, so it doesn't get confused with everything else in the.
and you want just like what we've been doing is just copying the existing Weber County ordinance,
Yes,
and then so you want just a total clean copy with no changes.
yes,
Okay,
but then walking through what you just did is great, just so
Yeah.
everybody's clear on how to make those.
And just
and we'll name it something so that.
So that. One.
Reduce it
Work
right.
on this one, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to be overlaid with other.
Gotta be able to know which is the one that you're working
Yeah.
on.
Right, maybe just reference my eyes.
Yeah.
This one, pick me.
Okay, we'll get that set up tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Regarding the plan, the Ogden Valley master plan.
General plan.
General plan, sorry,
Yeah.
brain fart. How do we propose that we work on that collectively, get all the information that's been put in the file, so that we can start working towards the final product, Right now, we have a lot of information and we have a lot of different ideas of how do we start collecting. Yeah.
So do we,
I think that's still in Brian's court.
Yeah.
To clean up and get those comparative comments would be still
And I
helpful.
think now that he has your version, that will simplify his.
yes,
Not to say that the drawn out one wasn't good, I think there's some good information there. But I think it can be condensed back down to where more accurately to where what used to be.
I mean, to me, like the studies that are in there that are relevant, that you feel would be appropriate, that are within our boundaries, things like that could be linked and referenced. But my understanding is I don't think we need to go through a whole big shape. It just needs some technical fixes, even if that's all we did for now. It's
Yeah.
still a great guide for us in our.
and if we find a few things that
We
we
can
think,
always go back.
that snippet would be really helpful.
I agree with that, so we have this clear, Brian's going to consolidate that information and come up with a rough draft, cutting out all the stuff that's
For us,
necessary.
for us to use and make comments on.
As a
In
clean
the same way, a clean copy that we can then make comments on. In the
Alright.
same fashion as the ordinances, yes?
Yes.
And maybe.
And then if each of us do that, and then we can all see what everyone else is doing, maybe that's when we.
Well, you will work off of his.
If we work off his copy, all of our comments will
Right.
show in the
Right.
different colors.
And then we meet again and maybe say.
Right.
Talk about the comments.
Yes.
As a group.
Mhm.
Yeah, so potentially next week Brian has that ready for us, and then.
He's gonna have that for us before next week.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
He sent me that.
He's gonna go work all night long.
I would put that out of the way, people have-
At-
And so then we can work on that and maybe set up
And-
a
and-
goal of a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
To go with
To
that.
get that done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's best if we each review it individually, come together and just kind of pull it up on the screen and talk through our feedback.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go with it,
Yeah.
don't, and give.
Back and
feedback.
forth.
Really, I have a question. Can somebody put together a list of phone numbers for people?
Well, at this point, I wanted to ask,
Here,
I believe that if everybody's, who whoever is okay with having their phone number shared, I asked people for their phone numbers, and I feel like if someone shared their phone number with me, I don't share it unless everybody's open, so if you're okay with having your phone. Okay, and if some people might want it to be private.
anyway.
That's okay, and I will prepare that list and get it to people. If you've already given me your number, tell me if it's not okay for me to share it, and then I'm okay.
Can we put it in the shared drive with emails?
We already have a.
We have.
Our phone numbers in there?
I don't think phone numbers
Oh.
are there, so.
Wow.
But if you tell Lisa you wanna share, then we'll open up.
Or
that.
how about if I have,
We'll
yeah.
just move that over.
Let me know and
I
we'll.
don't want it public, but yeah.
Sure,
No,
of course.
Yeah, if you wanna put it in your file with the shared drive, then tell Lisa and we'll move over whoever's.
Yeah, it makes total
Right.
sense for
I
everyone.
think we should be able to.
Yeah.
Yes, and there is one of us who wants to use their email only,
Okay,
and that's fair,
yeah, that's cool.
okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So just to recap, you'll have one clear copy of the ordinances that we can start copying at, or zones, excuse me, the zones that you can look at. And one soon to come clear copy of the general plan.
Yes.
Okay,
Anything else that you understood from the group?
I'm
I
good.
think so.
and I'm going to then say it for our work session next Tuesday, 3 to 5. Can you, Les, plan to give us a presentation? Is 30 minutes?
Yeah,
30 minutes, 40 minutes? What are you thinking? 30 minutes? Can you,
it feels like a hose.
what do you guys,
Julie,
you can do that?
minutes is fine, I'll work with whatever time you have. I've
Okay.
started the rough draft with 2
Oh, you
different
did?
presentations and it relates kind of what you guys want to hear.
I think if you propose what you think would be important to have in the draft and then explain why, that would be the most important.
Yeah, and then if we have questions, we can.
I'm sure we're really into the weeds.
Because we don't want to get into these amount of time at the
Right,
very
yeah.
so we
Right.
can get to
Okay,
there pretty quick.
And then you have a meeting coming up on the 19th.
The same day, Tuesday. No, it's Thursday, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Thursday, yes,
The
Thursday.
19th, correct, which I was planning to go to, and others might wanna go to that, say.
And if you want to learn more, OBWAG.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I have the website now, and it's, I've seen some, I found the Facebook page.
Just be careful, if more than 4 of you want to go.
Right, we have to spread out and not talk to each other.
Oh,
That's true.
If we all end up at Valley Market one day.
We just can't we just say hi, are you kids, what'd you have for dinner, but not any business.
Work.
Yeah. Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Want you to take a picture?